It was a crisp autumn afternoon in a wealthy suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where every lawn was meticulously trimmed, and the houses, large and stately, stood like monuments to success. Golden leaves fluttered from the tall oak trees lining the street, scattering across the pristine driveways. The low hum of luxury cars passing by, mixed with the faint sound of children laughing from behind tall iron gates. At the end of the cul-de-sac, there stood the Jennings house, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, cold and immaculate. Inside, the atmosphere was no different. The walls were adorned with tasteful art, the furniture positioned with clinical precision. It was the kind of home where comfort took a back seat to presentation. Jennifer Jennings stood by the front window, her manicured fingers lightly tapping against the glass. She was dressed in an elegant cream blouse and designer slacks, her blonde hair swept into a perfect bun. Her husband, Charles, sat in the sleek leather armchair across the room, scrolling through his phone, his tailored suit still crisp from his day at the office. Their two children, Ella and Max, aged 7 and 9, sat quietly on the sectional couch, absorbed in their tablets. "I hope she's on time," Jennifer murmured, glancing at the grandfather clock. "She'll be here," Charles replied without looking up. There was a knock at the door. Jennifer smoothed her blouse and opened it. Standing there was a young woman, no older than 20, with deep brown skin and long natural curls framing her face. She wore a neat sweater and jeans, clutching a small purse. Her eyes were warm but guarded. "Hi," she said with a bright smile. "I'm Maya. I'm here for the babysitting job." Jennifer's smile froze. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she took in the girl's appearance. "You're Maya." "Yes," Maya said, extending her hand. Jennifer hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking it quickly. "Ah, I see. Well, come in." As Maya stepped inside, Charles glanced up, his brows furrowed. Jennifer closed the door behind her and smiled, polite but cold. "Are you sure you have the right address?" Charles asked, standing. Maya's smile faltered. "Yes. I spoke with Mrs. Jennings on the phone." Jennifer's smile tightened. "Yes, of course. Why don't you sit down?" Maya perched on the edge of a chair. Ella and Max peeked up from their tablets. "So, Maya," Jennifer said, her tone smooth but clipped. "Do you have experience with children?" "Yes. I've been babysitting since I was 16, Maya replied. Jennifer and Charles exchanged a brief glance. There was something unspoken in the air, an unspoken discomfort, a quiet judgment. "And where exactly do you live?" Jennifer asked. Maya hesitated. "I live nearby." "Nearby?" Charles's voice sharpened. "Which part?" "West Hollow." Jennifer's eyebrows lifted. Charles's mouth twitched. West Hollow was not a part of town associated with people who lived in neighborhoods like this. "Ah," Jennifer said, her voice light but with an undertone of condescension. "Well, let's see how the evening goes." Maya's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the large glass windows. Something was already unraveling beneath the surface, a quiet storm preparing to break. Dinner time was awkward. Maya sat at the kitchen island, helping Ella and Max with their spaghetti, while Jennifer and Charles stood nearby, whispering in low tones. Maya could feel their eyes on her, even when they weren't looking directly at her. "Ella, don't spill that," Jennifer called out sharply as the little girl's fork slipped, sending a small splash of sauce onto the marble countertop. "I've got it," Maya said softly, grabbing a napkin and wiping it up with practiced ease. Jennifer's gaze lingered on Maya's hand. "Thank you," she said, her tone forced. Maya smiled at Ella and handed her a fresh napkin. Ella smiled back. "So, Maya," Charles said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "You said you've been babysitting since you were 16? "Yes," Maya said. "And you're studying?" "Yes, psychology." "Oh," Jennifer said, her brow arching slightly. "That's ambitious." Maya's smile remained steady. "I've always been interested in understanding people." Charles's mouth curled slightly. "And how are you affording that?" Maya's smile wavered for a fraction of a second. "Scholarships." "I see," Charles said, his tone laced with quiet skepticism. Jennifer stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. "Maya, Why don't you take the kids to the playroom for a little while? Sure. Maya stood, and Ella immediately reached for her hand. Max followed reluctantly. As Maya led them upstairs, Jennifer sighed and leaned toward Charles. I don't know about this. She seems polite enough, Charles said. That's not the point, Jennifer replied, lowering her voice. You saw where she's from. Charles said nothing. His eyes narrowed as he watched Maya disappear around the corner. Upstairs, Maya sat on the carpeted floor with the kids. Ella curled up beside her while Max sat cross-legged, holding a toy car. Do you like babysitting? Ella asked. I do, Maya said. You're nice, Ella said with a shy smile. Thank you, Maya said, her heart warming a little. Max wasn't as easily won over. He watched Maya carefully. Do you have brothers and sisters? Yes, Maya said. An older brother. Does he live around here? No, Maya said softly. He works away. Max seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to his toy. Maya glanced toward the door and froze. Jennifer was standing there watching them. Everything okay? Maya asked. Jennifer's smile was thin. Fine. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A text from her brother. I'll call you later. Jennifer's eyes flicked toward the phone. I'd appreciate it if you stayed off your phone while you're with the children, she said smoothly. Of course, Maya said, slipping the phone into her pocket. Jennifer lingered a moment longer, then turned and left. Ella leaned close and whispered, Mummy's always like that. Maya smiled softly. It's okay. Downstairs, Charles was looking at his phone when Jennifer walked into the room. I don't know, Jennifer said, her voice sharp. We barely know anything about her. Charles sighed. She seems fine. You don't know that, Jennifer hissed. What if? What if? What? Jennifer's lips pressed into a thin line. What if we've made a mistake? Just then the front doorbell rang. Charles stood and walked toward it. When he opened the door, his expression shifted instantly. Standing there was a man, tall, imposing, and dressed in a sharp gray suit. His dark brown skin was smooth, and his eyes were calm but penetrating. Good evening, the man said. His voice was low and controlled. May I help you? Charles said. I'm here to pick up my daughter, the man said. Charles frowned. Excuse me. Just then Maya appeared at the top of the stairs, her face brightening. Dad. Jennifer's breath caught. Charles's eyes widened. Dad. Jennifer repeated. Maya smiled and hurried down the stairs toward the man. Charles's jaw tightened. And who are you? The man smiled faintly. I'm William Carter. Jennifer's face paled. William Carter, as in William Carter. Yes, he said calmly. Charles's mouth opened and closed. Jennifer's hand flew to her chest. William Carter was not just anyone. He was the CEO of one of the largest tech firms in the country. A billionaire. A man who was regularly featured on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. A man whose name carried weight in every boardroom from New York to Silicon Valley. Maya's father. Jennifer's throat tightened. Charles's eyes darted toward Maya, who stood beside her father, looking perfectly at ease. I didn't realize, Jennifer began. William's smile was razor sharp. That's often the case. Maya's eyes softened as she glanced at Jennifer. It's okay, she said gently. But it wasn't, not really. Silence stretched across the room like a taut wire. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed as her gaze darted between Maya and William. Charles' face was stiff, the carefully maintained confidence in his posture cracking at the edges. William's eyes swept over the lavish interior of the house, the grand staircase, the marble floors, the expensive artwork lining the walls. Then his gaze settled on Jennifer and Charles with a quiet, measured intensity. I wasn't aware that Maya's employment was an issue, William said calmly. Jennifer's hand fluttered to her chest. Oh no, not at all. We just weren't expecting. You weren't expecting me, William finished, his tone even. Jennifer's eyes widened. No, Let's not pretend, William said, cutting her off with chilling precision. Jennifer's face flushed red. We didn't mean any harm. We were just being cautious. Cautious, William repeated. His voice was calm, but the weight behind the word was unmistakable. Charles cleared his throat and stepped forward. I'm sure you understand. We have to be careful about who we allow around our children. William's eyes narrowed slightly. Because Maya's from a different background. Charles' face tightened. No, of course not. William's gaze didn't waver. Because she's black. Jennifer's breath hitched. Charles' mouth thinned into a hard line. That's not what we. William stepped forward, his presence filling the room. His eyes locked onto Charles's. You see this house? William's voice was low and steady. The marble floors, the paintings, the custom furniture. Charles swallowed. I know exactly what it takes to afford all of this, William continued. The deals, the late nights, the compromises. I built something like this once, from nothing. Jennifer's lips parted, but no sound came out. And I did it, William said, his gaze sharpening, so that my daughter would never have to prove her worth to anyone. Maya's hand slipped into her father's, and he squeezed it gently. Charles's chest rose and fell. His eyes were dark with unspoken conflict. William's gaze softened slightly, as he glanced toward Maya. And yet, here we are. A beat of heavy silence followed. Jennifer's cheeks were burning. Charles's eyes were glassy. William's expression remained calm. I'm not angry, he said quietly. Disappointed. Yes, but not surprised. Jennifer's mouth trembled. We didn't mean to offend. You didn't think you were offending, William said. That's the problem. A small sound came from the stairs. Ella was standing at the top, holding onto the railing. Daddy, she called. Charles's head turned toward his daughter. His face softened. Ella's eyes moved to Maya. Is Maya leaving? Maya smiled softly. Not yet, sweetheart. Ella descended the stairs, her little feet tapping softly on the marble. She ran toward Maya and wrapped her arms around her waist. Maya's nice, Ella said, her voice small. Don't be mean to her. Jennifer's face crumbled. Her gaze moved toward her daughter, and something in her chest twisted painfully. William watched the exchange with quiet understanding. He knelt down, meeting Ella's eyes. You're right, William said gently. Maya is nice. Ella smiled. William stood and faced Jennifer and Charles. His expression was calm but unyielding. You've already shown Maya who you are, William said. Now, you'll have to decide who you want to be. Charles's eyes lowered. Jennifer's arms were wrapped tightly around herself, her face tight with emotion. William turned toward Maya. Ready? Maya hesitated. She glanced at Ella, then at Jennifer. I can stay, Maya said softly. William's gaze warmed. Only if you want to. Maya smiled at Ella. I want to. Ella's eyes lit up. She hugged Maya tighter. Jennifer's lips trembled. Thank you, she whispered. William gave a small nod. It's not me you need to thank. Jennifer's eyes shone with quiet shame and understanding. Charles's gaze softened. He reached out and took Jennifer's hand. Maya smiled at Ella. Let's go finish your puzzle. Ella beamed. Okay. William watched as Maya led Ella toward the playroom. He turned toward Jennifer and Charles one last time. Change starts here, he said quietly. Jennifer's lips parted. She nodded slowly. William stepped toward the door. He opened it, paused, and glanced back. I hope you'll treat her better than you treated me, William said. Charles's eyes widened. But William didn't wait for a response. He walked out, leaving behind the heavy echo of his words. Jennifer's chest rose and fell. Charles's hand tightened around hers. And somewhere down the hall, the sound of Ella's laughter floated back toward them. Jennifer stood in the hallway long after the front door had closed. The weight of William's words hung in the air like smoke, thick and lingering. Charles stood beside her, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the marble floor beneath his feet. The sound of Ella's giggles echoed from the playroom, mingling with Maya's soft voice as they chatted about puzzles and princesses. The warmth in Ella's laughter contrasted painfully with the cold knot in Jennifer's chest. Jennifer sighed and leaned against the wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Did you know? She asked quietly. Charles's head lifted. What? Did you know who Maya's father was? Charles shook his head slowly. No, his gaze darkened. But it shouldn't have mattered. Jennifer's lips trembled. But it did matter. Her voice was low, thick with guilt. Charles's eyes softened as he took a step toward her. Jen, I didn't even realize I was doing it. Jennifer whispered. I told myself it was about safety. But it wasn't. It was about… Charles's silence gave her space to find the word. Control, she said finally. About assuming the worst. Charles sighed. His hand found hers, his fingers weaving through hers. I guess we have some unlearning to do. Jennifer's chin dipped. A tear slid down her cheek. And Maya, Jennifer whispered. She didn't deserve that. Charles nodded slowly. His jaw tightened. William was right. We showed Maya exactly who we are. Jennifer wiped her cheek. But maybe we still have time to show her something better. A soft sound made them both turn. Maya stood in the doorway, Ella clutching her hand. Ella's face was bright, oblivious to the tension that still lingered between the adults. Maya, however, wasn't oblivious. Her eyes moved carefully between Jennifer and Charles. Ella wants to show you the puzzle, Maya said quietly. Jennifer swallowed, her gaze lingering on Maya's calm, guarded expression. Charles smiled tightly. We'd love to see it. Ella tugged Maya's hand toward the playroom. Maya hesitated, her eyes lingering on Jennifer. Jennifer took a step forward. Maya, she said softly. Maya's gaze lifted. Jennifer's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Maya's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened just slightly. Jennifer took a breath. We'd really like for you to stay. Ella tugged Maya's arm impatiently. Come on. Maya smiled faintly. Okay. As Maya and Ella disappeared down the hall, Jennifer turned toward Charles. Her face was tight with quiet shame, but also with quiet hope. I think I'm going to call William, she said. Charles arched an eyebrow. To apologize. Jennifer's lips pressed together. And to thank him. Charles's gaze softened. He brushed a hand against her shoulder. I think that's a good idea. In the playroom, Maya sat on the floor beside Ella, watching as the little girl placed the final piece of the puzzle. It's done. Ella beamed. Maya smiled. Jennifer and Charles stood at the door watching the scene quietly. Jennifer's heart clenched at the warmth in Ella's smile, the quiet patience in Maya's expression. Ella scrambled to her feet and ran toward Jennifer. Mummy, look what we made. Jennifer knelt down, pulling Ella into her arms. Her gaze lifted toward Maya. It's beautiful, Jennifer said softly. Maya's lips curled into a faint smile. Charles stepped beside Jennifer, resting a hand on her shoulder. His gaze met Maya's. Thank you for staying. Maya's eyes softened. Thank you for letting me. Jennifer's chest squeezed. We'll try to do better, she said softly. Maya's smile widened just slightly. Ella tugged on Maya's hand. Come on, Maya, let's build another one. Maya laughed. Okay. Jennifer and Charles stood side by side, watching as their daughter and Maya sat back down to start a new puzzle. Jennifer's hand slid into Charles's. He squeezed it gently. We have a lot to learn, Jennifer whispered. Charles's gaze softened. At least we're starting. The sun had started to set outside the wide windows, casting golden light across the playroom floor. Maya sat cross-legged beside Ella, patiently helping her fit together the puzzle pieces. Their quiet laughter mixed with the fading light, filling the room with a calm, almost sacred peace. Jennifer stood at the doorway, her arms crossed gently over her chest. Her gaze lingered on Maya's calm expression, the quiet warmth in her smile. Charles stepped beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. It's funny, isn't it? Jennifer's eyes lifted toward him. What is? How it took someone from outside our world to open our eyes. Jennifer's lips curled into a small, rueful smile. Not just someone, she said quietly. Maya. Charles nodded. And William. Jennifer sighed. Her chest felt lighter than it had in days. He was right, she admitted. We judged Maya the moment we saw her, and we were wrong. Charles' gaze softened. The important thing is that we know it now. Jennifer's chest tightened. But knowing isn't enough. Charles' brow lifted. No? Jennifer shook her head. We need to do better. Her gaze moved toward Maya. Not just for her. For us. Maya glanced up from the floor, her dark eyes meeting Jennifer's across the room. Jennifer smiled. A small, genuine smile. Maya smiled back. Jennifer's heart warmed. Later that evening, after Maya had tucked Ella into bed, Jennifer walked her to the front door. Maya hesitated on the threshold. the cool evening air brushing against her skin. Maya, Jennifer said softly. Maya turned. Jennifer's gaze was steady. We'd like you to stay on. Maya's brow lifted slightly. Jennifer's smile deepened. If you're willing. Maya's eyes softened. I'd like that. Jennifer's chest swelled with quiet relief. Good. Maya's lips twitched. William will probably give you an earful about this. Jennifer's smile widened. I'd expect nothing less. Maya's eyes glinted with quiet warmth. Good night, Mrs. Halloway. Jennifer's expression softened. Jennifer, she corrected gently. Maya's smile widened. Good night, Jennifer. As Maya walked down the driveway, Jennifer lingered at the door, her hand resting lightly on the frame. Behind her, Charles' voice drifted down the hallway. How did it go? Jennifer smiled. We're starting over. Charles's arms wrapped around her waist from behind, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. That's the thing about second chances, Charles murmured. They only work if you're brave enough to take them. Jennifer's chest swelled. Then let's be brave. Outside, Maya's silhouette disappeared down the path, but her quiet presence lingered. Jennifer's gaze lifted toward the stars overhead. They glittered in the night sky, small lights cutting through the darkness, and for the first time in a long time, Jennifer believed they could find their way forward.